You open your eyes at dawn and turn in the cool bed sheets. A few feet above your head, affixed to the top of the roof, a layer of solar panels blinks in the morning sun. Their power mixes with electricity pulled from several clean energy sources, towering wind turbines to the east, small nuclear power plants to the north, deep geothermal wells to the south. 40 years ago, your parents cooled their bedrooms with joules dredged out of coal mines and oil pits. They mined rocks and burned them, coating their lungs in the byproducts. They encased their world, your world, in a chemical heat trap. Today, that seems barbaric. You live in a cocoon of energy so clean it barely leaves a carbon trace, and so cheap you can scarcely find it on your monthly bill. You walk to the kitchen to turn on the sink. Water from the ocean pours out of the faucet. It's fresh and clear, piped in from a desalination plant. These facilities use microbial membranes to squeeze out the ocean salt. Today, they provide more than half of the country's fresh used water. Previously overtaxed rivers, such as the Colorado and Rio Grande, have surged back to life now that we don't rely on them to irrigate our farms and fill our coffee mugs. In Phoenix and Las Vegas and Albuquerque, previously parched cities are erupting in green foliage. The year is 2050. So this is a picture of an abundant future that I really believe is within our grasp if we can will ourselves to getting it right. So now to help lay the groundwork for this more abundant water future, I'd like to turn to our experts. We have Keith Julian, John D'Antonio, and Reese Baker, visionary leaders. These guys are steeped in water, as you will see. I'll have each of them come up individually to give a short presentation. Then we'll hit the chairs and have a panel discussion. Keith?
So our focus today is talking about the effect of the mega drought on our water supplies and the future economy and culture of our state. So during my more than 5 decades long career as an earth and environmental scientist, I've focused on natural resource issues. Over the last decade or so, most of my attention has been on water issues here in New Mexico in the Southwest and on long-term storage of renewable energy. So looking at this map here, what is the mega drought? How bad is it? And what can we do about it? That'll be the focus of my next 15 minutes presentation. The map on the right shows that about half of the entire United States is currently in drought. The southwestern states, everything from Southern California through Arizona, Utah, Nevada, New Mexico, parts of Colorado, are in extreme drought. And what can we do about that? The forecasts are that this is not just the usual cyclical drought that we had at the beginning of the 20th century or during the 1950s or the 1970s here, all of which lasted roughly a decade or so. This is going to be a long-term drought. According to climatologists at University of New Mexico and New Mexico Tech, we're probably going to experience drought like this over at least the next 50 to 100 years. Why? Because this drought is largely as a result of the changing climate. And changing climate, well, the next time the climate cycle may change again, or we finally start reducing the amount of fossil fuels and carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, it's going to take at least 5 to 10 decades. The result, of course, is tremendous impact on natural resources, wildfires, lakes that dry up, rivers that dry up. So where does our water come from? Well, at least the conventional water that we use when we open our tap in our homes and in our businesses. So this is a diagram of this, sort of the old hydrologic cycle. You remember that from 5th grade science class. The clouds, rains or snows, comes down, hits the surface of the earth. This is called surface water. The surface water then runs off through lakes, rivers, into lakes, ultimately down into the ocean, where the sun's energy re-evaporates it, puts it back in the clouds, and it rains and snows again. That's the surface water. But a certain portion of that, and depending on the local geology and ground topographic conditions, is absorbed within the ground and the soil as groundwater. The shallow groundwater, less than 2,500 feet below the surface, typically is used by humans for various economic purposes: agriculture, our own domestic water supplies, industry. And the deep groundwater, though, has been deposited, actually much of that from the ice ages over the last 2 million years. And that deep groundwater has not been exploited yet. And I'll explain why that's the case in a minute. But the conventional sources are primarily surface water and shallow groundwater. So when we talk about water, we use a rather arcane standard of measurement called the acre foot. An acre foot is the amount of water that would cover an acre, which is a little bit larger than an American football field, 1 foot deep. So that's about 226,000 gallons of water. It's about the amount of water that 3 average New Mexico households use every year for their domestic needs and for irrigation for their yards and so forth. So let's talk about where that water is used here in New Mexico and how we use it. The vast majority of water use in New Mexico goes to agriculture and croplands. About 75%, 3/4 of all water used in New Mexico is in croplands and agriculture. That's about 900,000 acre feet per year. The next greatest use is our public water supplies, the water systems that you probably, or most of you who live in cities or in towns are using that water. That's about 9%. Ironically enough, New Mexico, because of our arid climate and so forth, has about 8% of our total water use is through evaporation of that surface water. There's an old joke that in New Mexico, Elephant Butte Reservoir is where New Mexico sends its water to dry out, and there's some real truth in that. So 8% of all of our water just gets evaporated back up off the surface. Mining and oil and gas use, about 3%. Electric power generation and evaporative cooling, 2%. Commercial transportation, 2%. Livestock and dairy, 1%. Private domestic wells, small wells, less than 1%. And ironically enough, manufacturing and industrial activities use less than 1%, even though they generate more economic contribution to our gross domestic supply than any of these other sources of economic use. The total use of demand, and use is about 3.85 million acre feet. So just remember that, 3.85 million. That's an average over the last 10 years. So this is probably fairly accurate. So let's look at the supply versus our demand. Our actual supply is about 3.5 million acre feet. Our demand, 3.85 million acre feet. Do the math quickly. We've got a deficit of about 350,000 acre feet per year in New Mexico. That's around 10% of our supply. We're using more than we have. So let's talk about some other uses, non-economic uses, but also that are going to be very much as much or more impactful on our water use in New Mexico. The biggest, of course, is the decreased water supply resulting from the drought. The forecasts by climatologists and hydrologists are that New Mexico will probably have about 30% less water available, surface water and groundwater, conventional water, within the next 25 years. So by 2050, we're going to have 30% less than we have right now, just to begin with. In addition, we have already over-allocated our water supply. Water rights, we've issued more than about 10% more water rights than we actually have water. It's called dry water. It isn't there. Those of you who are farmers, or if you have a rural estate or something like that, and you own water rights, you know that you probably aren't going to be able to use all of that water because it isn't there. The other big source is that in 1908, the Supreme Court issued a decree saying that any Indian reservations that were created by the United States government, and including things like the Pueblos, are guaranteed as part of the trust arrangement between the U.S. government and the tribes. They are guaranteed all the water they need. Now, that need, the amount of that need, was never quantified. It was never really described. And so far, that water has not, those water rights have never been granted, except in a few cases. We do the Amat settlement up here in the Espanola Valley, that has been adjudicated. And as a result, Puake and Nambe and Tusuke pueblos have had benefited enormously from that. That's why they have these, I think, 2 or 3 18-hole golf courses, I believe, at Buffalo Thunder. That water is all their water because they had that right. And under U.S. water law, Western water law, it's first in time, first in line. Whoever needs it first, or who is the oldest holder of those rights, gets to use it first. The revision of our interstate water compacts. As you know, the Colorado River compact was devised in the 1920s based on data from water in the first part of the 20th century. That is much, much wetter period of time than we have now. And so that water is over allocated by about 40%. That is, we only have about 60% of that water that we thought we had. So California, Nevada, Arizona, particularly the lower basin states, are going to be losing almost probably half of their amount of water that they thought they had through the Colorado River. The same is true of the Rio Grande Compact. That was 1931, again based on data from the 1920s that is no longer valid in terms of the amount of water we have. There are also mandated natural resource uses, things like the critical habitat for the silvery minnow. You've probably heard about that case in the Rio Grande River. That's going to require additional water that we can't use for economic purposes. And finally, increased demographic demand. We have population growth and greater per capita use by people. So all of these uses do not contribute to our economy directly, but they're going to have a tremendous impact on our amount of water we have. So if you add all these up together, it's a potential future annual decrease of between 1 and 10 million acre feet. Now remember, right now we're using 3.85 million acre feet. So we're talking about anywhere from 30% to 300% of our existing water that we have is going to be gone. Now, how can you have 300% gone? Well, it just would be reallocated to some other purposes. That's a pretty severe, and that's much of that is the drought, but other conditions associated with that mean that we really have some very interesting water futures ahead of us. So what are we going to do about this? Well, it turns out the good news is we've been talking about conventional water up to now. But New Mexico is in a unique position. We're one of the few states that has deep, deep basins that were formed as a result of geologic processes over the last roughly 80 million years that have been filled up like a sponge. So there's a lot of water down there, deep groundwater, that we haven't been able to use yet. So let's talk about some of these unconventional water sources. I call this new water for New Mexico. The largest is brackish water. So the water that we typically drink and so forth can have up to 1,000 parts per million of dissolved solids, minerals and salts, things like that. Human beings can tolerate that. Anything more than that, though, from about 1,000 to 10,000 parts per million of dissolved solids, is called brackish water. By comparison, seawater is about 35,000 parts per million. So we're talking about water that's 3 to 10% as salty as the ocean. That is, the ocean water is 97% more salty than this brackish water. Again, it's deeper than 2,500 feet, and the importance of that number, John D'Antonio will talk about in his presentation, because that becomes a critical quantitative factor. And it's, again, the water from 1,000 to 10,000 TDS. Another source is produced water. So this is water that comes from the formations underground as oil and gas is extracted. For every 1 barrel of oil that comes out of the ground in New Mexico, between 4 and 10 barrels of water come out. Currently, the Permian Basin down in southeast New Mexico is producing about 1.2 million barrels per day. So just do the math, that's 5 million barrels of water per day. Now, currently that water cannot be used except within the oil patch. There are considerations being made right now and regulations for reuse of that water, but it's not available to us at this point. And then the third source is reclaimed or reused water. There are some small uses of this. The city of Albuquerque, Santa Fe, Las Cruces, a few other cities do take some of their wastewater and they clean it up through desalination and treated water, and then they can use it again. So far, none is being used for potable uses, not as drinking water. It's being used to irrigate golf courses, parks, and things like that. So let's talk about how much of this unconventional water is available. Total potential is about 3 to 4 to 5 billion, with a B, billion acre feet. That's a lot of water. That's enough water at our current use and demand to last us between 500 to 1,500 years. So the greatest of all these potential is the brackish groundwater. We are pretty sure it's there, but no one has really actually begun the regular exploitation and use of this water. And that's really what the opportunity that we're going to be talking about this evening for those of you, those courageous entrepreneurs out there that want to become the water wildcatters, just as the oil and gas industry had its wildcatters in the 1920s. There's a chance for you to be a water wildcatter today. One particular advantage of New Mexico, too, is that this brackish groundwater is spread throughout the state. It lies underneath the 20 major basins within the state of New Mexico. And if you'll notice, most of the water is concentrated, most of the basins are concentrated here along the Rio Grande corridor. That's where most of our population, 80% of our state's population is there. And that's where the greatest demand for this water is going to be, however it's going to be used. It's also now, for the first time, economical and efficient to be able to desalinate this water. Desalination used to be so expensive and required so much energy that it just didn't make sense to pump water deep from 2,500 feet up to the surface and try to use it. But because of two factors, number one, much more efficient desalination technologies, treatment technologies, we can now extract typically 80 to sometimes 95% of the pure water out of brackish groundwater. That is, we have a recovery rate of 80 to 95%. By comparison, seawater desalination, they typically only get about 60 to 65% of the fresh water out of seawater. The other factor is the fact that it used to be that desalination required tremendous amounts of energy using reverse osmosis or distillation, various techniques. Energy was very expensive. Now, though, in New Mexico, we have almost endless opportunity to develop our wind and solar resources. And energy can be purchased now during the peak production period of midday, when our demand is much less than our supply here in New Mexico. It can be purchased for literally a penny or two per kilowatt hour. Typically, you pay in residential, you're paying about 8 to 10 cents per kilowatt hour. So we can use that surplus daytime production peak to use for desalination. And this desalinated water can be used for various different purposes, depending on how much treatment you want. So for example, if you want to generate hydrogen, you have to have absolutely pure water. It has to be H2O, nothing else in there. Otherwise, it'll foul up the electrolysis apparatus and so forth. We can do that through desalinating this brackish water. Or if you want drinking water, you can bring it down to less than 1,000 parts per million. Or if you want agricultural uses and other irrigation uses, again, taking water that say starts at 5,000 parts per million and desalinating it down to 1,000 or 2,000 parts per million can be done. So lots of uses. So here are some of the opportunities. If we're really talking about a 500 to 1,500 year supply, potential supply of this new water, what about selling that water to California, to Arizona, New Mexico, Nevada, and Utah, our surrounding states, perhaps even down to Mexico. With our current economies of scale, New Mexico could take our vast supplies of deep brackish water and use that for our new export base. As we phase out oil and gas as the major economic driver for our state's economy, let's replace it with water. We're a water-rich state. Other kind of uses are for data centers, supporting for data centers, high-value cash crops like chili, nuts, pecans, fruits and vegetables, cannabis. All of these are very high return for small amounts of water use. For minerals and mining, in the process of desalination, you're separating the pure water from the dissolved minerals. Well, it turns out that in many of these basins, the dissolved minerals are lithium and magnesium and other of these rare earth or strategic minerals that we're paying a lot of money to import from China, or at least we used to import them from China. For manufacturing of things like chips and solar panels, and I said hydrogen, and also by not using our existing surface water supplies from our lakes and our rivers and so forth. Instead, let's devote those to recreational outdoor activities and so forth. So lots of new opportunities. So again, let's just look at the total amount of acre feet. The greatest potential is the desalinated brackish groundwater, produced water, fallowing of low value cropland, municipal industrial wastewater reclamation, just talked about that, reduced surface evaporation by taking our surface water and instead of storing it in shallow reservoirs, let's inject it down into the ground. Unfortunately, that's rather costly. More efficient agricultural uses and less runoff, quite feasible. And finally, conservation of our existing municipal and landscape and irrigation uses, quite economical. So if you total all of these sources, the new water that we have for New Mexico is greater than 4 million acre feet per year. That's the potential. So with as an homage to Sergio Leone, the good, the bad, and the ugly. The good news is that it looks like we have ample unconventional water resources for a long time in the future. The condition is right now to begin developing that. The bad news is our economy is going to decline pretty seriously if we don't begin addressing this water issue soon. The ugly news is that time is of the essence because of not only the drought, which will extend out for a long period of time, but it is a more gradual thing. It's these non-economic demands, things like the Pueblo Indian water rights settlement, the renegotiation of the Colorado River Compact, the Rio Grande Compact. That's what's going to be impacting it very soon, if not tomorrow. The Bureau of Reclamation is right now literally in negotiation with the Colorado River states about reducing their water use, or their water demand, altogether by about 50%. We can't wait. So, although this mega drought continues as a major threat to New Mexico's future, it provides an opportunity for you courageous entrepreneurs out there, to use the phrase that Ward mentioned, to get in on the ground, or perhaps I should say groundwater floor. There's a chance for you to do some good for New Mexico while simultaneously doing well for yourself. As we all know, el agua es vida. And with that, I'll turn it over to the next speaker, John DiAntonio.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for being here tonight. Let me start mine. My background is Mexico State engineer for roughly 16 years. I actually served under 4 different governors for the state of New Mexico, also 22 years for the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, water development, water projects, water infrastructure. So I have a pretty big background in water, lifelong native from Albuquerque, and went to University of New Mexico. So I'm all in on New Mexico issues and really interested in how we're going to proceed forward with our water demands. Currently, I'm president of the board of directors in New Mexico Desalination Association, and work along with Keith. This has always been a compelling photograph for me. A cup there with no water in it and a faucet there. Is that water going to work? I think most of us are all just too optimistic that water is going to turn on every time we go to the faucet. And there's a lot that takes place in order for us to be able to get that water to our faucet. So don't take it for granted that you have a faucet and you're going to have water. Just quickly here, Keith had talked about groundwater, the basins in New Mexico and the aquifers, major aquifers. This adds a little color to it. If you look at he talked about the Rio Grande being a prolific aquifer. Those colors in yellow are the Rio Grande. You can see back here from the upper to the middle to the lower Rio Grande aquifers there. But superimposed on this video, this visual, is that we have the water basins that are delineated by these dark lines. So you have the San Juan Basin, Little Colorado. You've got Gila, San Francisco, Tularosa Basin, Salt Basin. This southern High Plains aquifer is the Ogallala, which a lot of you can understand what the Ogallala provides. A lot of groundwater for all the Midwestern states to produce our corn. We have a regional drawdown effect on that to New Mexico of about 3 feet, just based on other states pumping groundwater. Again, we have to look at this entire thing. Here are the major aquifers within the state of New Mexico and how they're interrelated with our water basins. Where we began in 1907 water code, before we were a state, we became a state in 1912. In 1907, we had a territorial water engineer. A surface water code was established. You needed a permit from the territorial engineer in order to divert and put water to beneficial use. Just quickly, all unappropriated water in New Mexico is considered public water. It's subject to use, subject to appropriation based on a permit from the state engineer's office for place and purpose of use. And the important concept here is priority of appropriation gives the better rights, especially in times of shortage. So you have a system where you have senior water rights that put water to beneficial use the earliest. Those that came after are considered more junior. And so depending on the water supply for a given year, theoretically, the junior users can be cut off. If you're 30% short in a particular basin, you can cut off 30% of the junior users to make sure the seniors get their full supply. Here's a simple way to say it. In New Mexico, all water is owned by the public, but individuals can earn the right to use the water. That's the beneficial use of that water. And it's done via permit from the state engineer's office. If there's a drought or shortage, those who started using the water the earliest get that first priority. Again, that's the senior, junior, and the priority system. It is a property right within the state of New Mexico. Let's look how the evolution of priority administration happened within the state of New Mexico. So we talked about the Surface Water Code in 1907. Not many people know this, but by the early 1900s, the surface water in New Mexico was fully appropriated. I mean, it was fully appropriated to farmers and others. You can imagine people thinking, really, how do you get additional water rights? So groundwater came into effect. It started being a problem. The state engineer codified some rules and regulations, required permits to pump groundwater. As technology improved, people were augmenting their supplies with groundwater. And so that's when the groundwater code came into play. And one of the most important concepts here is conjunctive management. Steve Reynolds, who had been a state engineer for 35 years, from 1955 to 1990, he was really considered the leader in water policy in the whole Western United States. The state engineer's office entered into a lawsuit with the city of Albuquerque. Out of that lawsuit came conjunctive management. Very important to understand the concept. If you're taking and pumping a gallon of water right alongside a river, you're creating this hole, and that surface water in the river, through the hydrologic connection, is going to try to fill that hole, and you're going to lose water to your surface water supply because of that groundwater pumping. You've got to take into consideration the effects of groundwater. After that, we had recurring droughts. It didn't take a genius to understand that every 20 years or so, for sure, we were having these droughts. And it was very difficult to look at priority administration, which is very draconian. You have a hammer, you cut off junior users, and as you look at enforcing priority rights, you're gonna cut off people that had drinking water rights, other rights that came later, and it was really a difficult system to implement within the state of New Mexico. And so how did we adapt and learn from that? The alternative administration concept in 2003, which is the first year that I became state engineer, I worked closely with the New Mexico Attorney General's office to come up with a statute on active water resource management. And the other piece of this is what we learned from how New Mexico was developed. There's a term called repartimiento. It was from the Sequia law, Moorish law that came into New Mexico. The Spaniards settled New Mexico in the late 1500s. 1598 is a water right that's the earliest water right that I know that's non-tribal water right. And those water rights were very important and established. You had the mayordomos that came in, and they determined what the water supply was going to be based on snowpack and other estimates, and said, hey, we're not going to get a full supply this year. We're going to share shortages. And that's kind of how the alternative administration sort of evolved. And looking at the mayordomo, how they managed water within the state of New Mexico for their acequias, and it was rooted in equity and cooperation, and especially during times of scarcity. I have a water shortage myself. So as we looked at general practice on how that concept of repartimiento, we looked at these different opportunities, shortage sharing opportunities. Every year almost we experience shortage sharing processes in the field, on the Gallinas River, up in the Rio Chama, down in the Jemez, even in the Membres and other areas within the state of New Mexico. We share shortages amongst water right owners in lieu of priority administration, which it's difficult to go in and cut off juniors for the benefits of seniors. The rotation concept, the Jemez River, for instance, when we looked at a gauge within the Jemez River that provides water for 3 different tribal entities, the Jemez, the Santa Ana, and the Zia Pueblo, and you have the Jemez other users, the non-Indians, the Jemez River users, as they call them. When water gets to a certain level, the non-Indians will only get water once a week, and the tribal entities will get it 6 days a week based on that. And that's a rotation concept, and then it varies based on the flow that's in the river, so that there's a rotation sharing there. Other agreements, we had a major water settlement. We had several water settlements when I was state engineer, the big one being the PECO settlement, in which that water was really not in hydrologic balance to the point where we owed Texas a lot of water, and we were putting Band-Aids and spending money, and it was very, very difficult to manage that situation on a year-to-year basis. The state of New Mexico spent $70 million to buy out some farms, cut off that water use, and brought that river back into hydrologic balance. So today we actually have a surplus, and had a surplus since we put this settlement in place, an example of a settlement. And then water banking concepts. Just today I saw in the news that Elephant Butte Irrigation District finally released water from Caballo. Their farmers are getting 6 inches of water. That's their allotment for the year. When a crop needs 3 feet of water, they're getting 6 inches of water. So a lot of times the water banking concept is they'll share it with a neighbor and say, hey, you take my water supply for this year, pay me X amount of dollars, and we'll do a kind of this water banking concept. This happens all over the state of New Mexico, and it's and we've learned that we learned to be able to do it through this sort of repartimiento concept. So in 2003, the Active Water Resource Management Statute, you can see the statute on the left. I won't read that, but the one on the right is essentially the layman's terms. We were called, when I was state engineer, to develop an emergency action plan to address the inevitable drought cycles through sound science and best water management practices. We abide by the existing laws and water rights, and respond to the community needs quickly and fairly? How do you execute a short-term transfer from an agricultural use to a higher economic use in a very short period of time? You've got to do the work ahead of time so that you know that there's not impairment, it's not contrary to conservation within the state of New Mexico, or detrimental to the public welfare. Those are the three tests the state engineer has to go through to make sure a water right transfer can happen for a change in place and purpose of use. When I said water was fully appropriated, the only way water can change for a growing community is to change and do a change in place and purpose of use. So you're transferring that consumptive use of water only, not the total water right diversion, but the consumptive use to that new place or purpose of use. And that's how you manage yourself through a growing community. At the time, we didn't have the tools. The emergency action plans, a drought's a slowly emerging natural disaster. And we determined the water districts that had been established. You can see, I won't go over them here, but your 7 key basins, Name, Powaka, Tisuke, I'll point out since it's right here above Santa Fe. But these were the 7 districts that were established. We had, you can imagine the territorial engineer being around since 1907. We had 7 district offices within the state of New Mexico, and parchment paper and paper that contained water rights information that needed to be digitized, brought into the Albuquerque office, and gone through by abstracting those water rights. It takes experts to be able to go through all that work and determine and save that data, because it's a personal property right. It's very important to the livelihood of the people that have those water rights. That's still ongoing, but it's most of that data is accessible through the internet on those water rights. One of the other tools is measuring and metering. I was one of the most unpopular guys in the state in 2003 because I issued metering orders in all those 7 basins. And my argument was, hey, you guys can be mad, you guys can want status quo, but you can't manage what you don't measure. And that really, really helped the state of New Mexico. It helped the state of New Mexico immensely in this current Texas v. New Mexico lawsuit if we hadn't put these tools in place. The other thing, water masters out in the field, we had to monitor and evaluate. You had to have some enforcement. You had to look at illegal and over diversions, and you had to have a presence so that people knew you were serious and able to act so that we could actually manage these water resources. These aren't easy. Surface water mechanisms to put in place, putting these flumes in and having to fit them in different scenarios. You can see here the challenges that might happen. You have to normalize the flow upstream and downstream so you get an accurate reading. That bottom right-hand box is telemetry information, and the middle bottom box shows the antenna that transmits data. You have to have live data. You have to understand and have real data so you can actually manage your water resources. So, given all that, the last tool was based on specific rules and regulations, and each district, each one of those districts, each water basin in the state of New Mexico really has to have its own rules and regulations, because you have stakeholders within those areas, and as state engineer, I didn't want to do a top-driven down process and say, hey, you guys, this is what you're going to do. We're getting the stakeholders together to look at an alternative means of administration and see how that was going to work. But we can see it's not enough. We started doing climatologists with the last state water plan. New Mexico will have 25% less water in our rivers and aquifers. That's a lot of water. That's 750,000 less acre feet in 50 years. This is the USGS risk index that shows that overlays the risk associated with a sustainable water supply. And with this, it's population growth, it's water needed for energy resources, and it's climate change scenarios. You can see how what a high risk situation we are in the Southwest United States on sustainability of our water supplies. This is an example of some data. This Climate Agency that used to do this on a regular basis. This is not current, but it's an example of how variable our water supply is in the state of New Mexico, and our stored water, which is the buckets of water. What I wanted to point out here, there's 15 reservoirs that they looked at. The top line, the size of the bucket essentially is the size of the storage proportionately. You can see the biggest one here being Elephant Butte. And Navajo Dam it's huge too, but you're looking at the capacity level, which is the top. The red line is the average, and then you see current supply. And we struggle to keep our reservoirs full just on an annual basis, and it's really a challenge for our water supply. So moving forward, I mentioned the 50-year water plan. We looked at, and what came out of this action plan was looking at augmenting our supply regionally using tools like brackish, groundwater desalination, water reuse, and treated or recycled produced water, things that Keith had talked about. I won't go over this, but Keith did mention in his talk that I would explain the deep groundwater piece, 2500. There's a special set of statutes that I was able to get through the state legislature in 2009, which allows for a notice of intent process to go in. And if you're willing to go in and file this notice of intent, you can go in and capture water that's deeper than 2,500 feet, greater than 1,000 parts per million through a notice of intent process. You have reporting requirements, but you can actually get it through fairly quickly, but it's costly and there's restrictions just based on economics. So let's look at the one of the real good things that happened out of this last legislative session is finally there was some recognition from the legislature on getting some funding towards desalination projects. The Strategic Water Supply Program, it passed. It was House Bill 137 through the legislature this year. Through that piece of legislation, the Environment Department, New Mexico Office of the State Engineer were given authority to contract and or give grants out for funding. I'll show you the funding amounts in a minute. The restrictions were that the grant recipient had to be a public entity or a tribal entity in order to be eligible to receive those funds. The eligible projects involve treated brackish water. So originally, as the bill was introduced, it included treated produced water. The only way that bill was going to get through is the treated produced water got stripped out of it, and it just relied totally on brackish water. So that's what happened. You have to clearly demonstrate how the project will advance state, tribal, or local government economic development goals. And another requirement, it must include specific, actionable, and measurable community benefits plan. And the last item, it requires public notice and a public hearing process, which again, I think everybody in the state understands that. It's people want to know, people don't want to be surprised. They want some say in how we develop this. And again, it's only for brackish water. We talked about 3 areas of additional water. This bill only deals with the brackish water that was approved for exploration. The funding, just quickly here, $40 million to the New Mexico Environment Department and the Office of the State Engineer. Again, this is specifically for pilot projects and desalination. $7.5 million. This was originally $19 million. Got reduced down to $7.5 million, but it's to the Bureau of Geology. We need aquifer characterization. I think Keith mentioned this a little bit. We really don't understand fully where the best aquifers are, what the best locations are, what their quality of water is, and their proximity to areas that are in need of water. So that characterization is going to happen. And $4 million was given to the New Mexico State University for innovative research, monitoring, support of this program. And again, the brackish groundwater sustainability. Keith had this slide also, but these are the goals. Find the best sources, locations, information. Are they deep or shallow wells? There is brackish water that's shallow. It would be more economical to go after, but we need to make that determination. The proximity of the source to a potential user. You got to have an end user defined and a quantity defined to make a good evaluation. Will the water source be sustainable? And again, that water is really not being recharged, right? So you have to have a plan in place that says, hey, there's 100 years of use, or if it's only 20 years of use and you're going to make a big development, does it really make sense to build that development on a source that's not being recharged? Those are the issues you need to understand. and how will it fit within the total water supply for the community or region, which is kind of what I said. What does extraction and use mean for the environment? There is a waste stream associated with produced water. How does that handled? And so that's another challenge for us. And I go back to this photograph, and this is my last slide. So the problem. What is the problem? The climate analysis is really in that 50-year plan really showed that New Mexico can't continue to operate on a business as usual scenario for water. We just can't do it anymore. What's the need? To provide municipalities, industries, agricultural folks with resilient water solutions. And what is the solution? The use of multiple and distributed sources of water, including non-traditional waters, treated and delivered at the right quantity and quality and at the right time. And I will end with this. Let's be open to new ideas and new opportunities. And I'll turn it over to Reese. I think so. He's our last speaker.
Well, hey everybody, it's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you to Ward and to John Strackerman for getting this all set up. It's been a lot of fun. And, to be, I guess I'll get over here a little closer. It's a real honor for me to be on the stage tonight with Keith and John. These guys have so much experience. They've got decades worth of projects under their belt. So, I'm going to be here tonight to talk a little bit about another unconventional source of water, which we all maybe experienced this evening in the form of rain. And I feel like I'm sort of the microcosm that's reflecting the macrocosm of what these guys have been discussing. And so some really nice person put that photo of me up there about 10 years ago. Thank you. All right, you guys, I'll keep this short. I've been in Santa Fe most of my life. 25 years ago, I started a company called The Rain Catcher. I often get teased about that. Oh, really? You're going to catch the rain? What rain? And about 10 years ago, I embarked on a PhD program at the University of New Mexico in biology. And what I'm really driven by is the fact that we have a resource with rainwater that I don't think we think about commonly. And I'm hoping to give you guys a sort of a cool paradigm shift on the way things are operating now and what we can be doing in the future. So if you take a look at this, you're looking down on what we call a rain garden. There's a movement going on, especially all over the Southwest, that involves what we call green stormwater infrastructure, GSI. And basically, what we should be thinking about is using stormwater as a resource instead of a problem, instead of something that is causing issues where we need to drain it off and move it around. And if we can think of it as a resource, all of a sudden we have this amazing capability to create ecosystems within our civilization that are not only recharging groundwater, but they're also purifying that water. So we will go through this in detail here in just a minute. So if you take a look at this, this is pretty standard, a pre-development concept of what things were like before human beings started coming in and doing all their anthropogenic shifts. And so let's go back, let's say 1,000 years and come over here into the Santa Fe County area. We had grasses that were covering the land. The pinon and juniper forests weren't quite so dense. When we'd get rainstorms, all those grass roots were holding water. They weren't, we have such fragile soils. We have such a small amount of organic matter. So when we get storms here, they're often infrequent. And so you've given the soil this huge amount of time to dry out. And what is a dry soil? It's similar to a dry sponge. It just sits there. There's no water that's infiltrating. And so if what we might notice here is, look at the difference between the infiltration rates in a pre-developed situation and the runoff rates, which we've got over here. We didn't have a lot of runoff back in these days. And one of the most important things is this groundwater here is shallow enough to be used by all of our trees, all of our plants, and our whole entire ecosystem. So what we have done now is we've got the same scenario, except all the plants still need this water, except we're not recharging the aquifers anymore in urban environment. Urban environments are they're not hydrologically sound, and they are definitely not ecologically sound. And so you might notice that before we had very little runoff, and now we have a huge amount of runoff. And unfortunately, that means the water's not getting into the ground. And also, that means that that water running off of the surface is polluted. We have a big issue. Urban environments are one of the largest contributors to pollution in all of our downstream freshwater ecosystems. And so, too bad we don't have any water in New Mexico, right? I mean, this is our street. This is my street right outside my house. This here happens to be the Arroyo de los Pinos. And this is about a 20-minute cloudburst. And if we look at our urban environments, the streets are actually the lifeblood of our ecosystem now. That is where the water concentrates. If a parking lot is designed, it's going to be draining off of the surface. Streets are draining. They're all going to storm drains. Those storm drains are engineered specifically to transport that water as fast as possible off site, which means we're taking all that water, try to imagine a drop of water 1,000 years ago that landed in a bosque, in a riparian ecosystem, and it got into the ground. It might take it millions of years to get to the ocean, whereas now, I mean, within a couple hours, the entire city of Santa Fe has been drained. There's no more water running. It's gone. And so I think this is an interesting video that I took just about a month ago. This is one of the giant canals in Albuquerque after a rainstorm. And if we could go back to a pre-developed situation, this water and maybe this entire canal system would be an ephemeral stream with all kinds of trees and shade and microclimates and wildlife habitat. And you can see that the quality of the water is very, very dark. Man, this screen is so big, it looks like it's coming at me. And you can see there's a lot of trash, there's a lot of debris, there's all kinds of stuff in this water. And unfortunately, we've got a huge amount of super intense toxins that are collecting in our stormwater. Right here, this is a little storm drain right outside my house. I live in a small neighborhood in Santa Fe, and look at the amount of trash and sediment and stuff that is collecting. A lot of this stuff will get through these storm drains and drain right into the arroyo. And then here's some of these management practices where we're trying to keep trash and stuff out of urban environments. And I feel like that we could do better than this. And you got this water coming through. Yes, we have captured some of this trash and all that stuff. But what's in this water is terrifying. We've got all kinds of biological contaminants, E. coli, coliform bacteria. We have heavy metals from brake pads. We have asphalt residue, polyaromatic hydrocarbons, all of which are carcinogenic in any biological system. We have microplastics, which is a huge concern all over the world. And so what we've basically done with our current infrastructure is found the best way and most efficient way to ensure that we are not recharging aquifers, which these guys have been talking about tonight, and ensuring that we are polluting our freshwater ecosystems efficiently as possible. And so I just wanted to bring this up. There was a nice test done. I think this was right before the pandemic, and we've got 94% of the tap water that was tested in the United States contains microplastics. So they are literally ubiquitous in our environment now. And microplastics, we do know, are causing all kinds of endocrine disruptions and intense things in our human civilization. And so let's maybe shift this paradigm a little bit. Here is an example of an urban stormwater rain garden. We have currently been contracted with Santa Fe County to build their green stormwater infrastructure manual, which I'm extremely excited about. And this has a lot to do with what we're going to be talking about tonight. I just wanted you guys to know that I did a little calculation. Keith got me so excited about all these huge numbers that he was talking about. And Santa Fe County is about almost 2,000 square miles. And if you were to take that area and put approximately 12 inches of water on it, we're looking at close to 400 billion gallons that falls annually. What is that water actually doing? Of course, Santa Fe County has a lot of rural areas, but right now that water is moving off the surface relatively quickly. We have a lot of slope, we have poor soils, we're not infiltrating that water. Our urban environments are designed to shed that water off the surface, so we're not putting any of that water back into the ground to help these groundwaters. let's just follow through this really quick. This is kind of exciting. We've got our street, and we've got all this water, and we have all these pollutants on our street. We had Sandia at National Labs come in, and we tested 15 locations in Santa Fe, and we found 660 carcinogenic molecules in these areas that we found, and that's in Santa Fe. I mean, let's try to imagine Albuquerque, or even more intensely somewhere like Los Angeles. And then we've got this nice basin here where this water will infiltrate into the ground, and we can start building this lens of moisture underground. And when we have this moisture here, we have the capability of growing all of these trees in this actual entire ecosystem. My company is based on the concept of permaculture, and permaculture is how we can reintegrate human beings with nature and start working with nature instead of against it. Everything that we do, we're trying to push back. We're trying to create things that are not biodegradable. And so with this whole concept, now our cities can be these incredible ecosystems, which have way more biodiversity than the city would normally. And now we're creating forests. We're creating wildlife habitat. We're creating pollinator habitat. We are creating a microclimate under here that creates shade and cools off the temperatures of our cities. These trees over here can reach out and stretch over the streets, mitigating the urban heat island effect, which is causing a major issue in some of the larger cities. And, you know, you guys might notice there's a log here, and that might be some oyster mushrooms growing out of it. I will talk about this in a minute, but I think not only do we have the capability to put water back into the ground, but we have the capability to use biology to clean it. And so we've got this beautiful water area. Trees are hydraulic redistributors of water from ground to surface areas. There's been some incredible studies on hydraulic redistribution by trees, and they can move water from deep water sources down here up into this area to promote a moisture lens here for some of the understory plants. And so, gosh, I wish we had more than 15 minutes because we could talk about a lot of stuff. So anyway, this is a kind of cool concept. And what I'd like to also point out is one of my dear friends and great colleagues, Aaron Kaufman, who's a hydrologist here in Santa Fe, did a 7-year study at the Santa Fe Community College where he had a curb cut and he had a rain garden put in, and then he had a control where the water would run through the curb and just off-site. And what's amazing that we've found here, because we're doing a bunch of this different hydrological testing right now, is if you look at the blue bars, those are where the rain gardens were. These are the depths of soil. And over 2,500 days, this green line here is the irrigation threshold. So that means if we can keep the soil moisture at this level, that means we do not have to irrigate these trees. I have been driving down Santa Fe, looking at these new developments. We have these big, beautiful trees planted in a big gravel pit, and there's drip emitters from a potable water source right next to them when we have this resource right next to the trees of the street that could be watering these trees. So if we really want to concentrate on using way less potable water for our landscapes, I think we can start utilizing all this stormwater to benefit us. And so this is pretty interesting because this top line here, this is the permanent wilting point. I'm sorry, this is the point where we are at field capacity. We can't hold any more water in the soil. And over time, at 30 inches and at 18 inches, these ecosystems with the rain gardens are holding almost enough water to keep it at field capacity, whereas the controls will get down to this permanent wilting point. And at that point, a plant and a tree cannot come back. It will be dead. So this might be a cool video for you guys to check out. This is that same rain garden that you saw from the very first slide. And here's a rainstorm. And we're taking this water, and we're moving it into a ecosystem that is not just a big giant pit that you guys have probably seen that have a whole bunch of rocks laid in them, these retention basins. And as you move through this water is supporting a huge amount of life. We've got western sand cherries, we have echinaceas, all kinds of pollinator flowers. We have shrubs. We also have edibles like the currants. We have different wax currants. We have golden currants, red currants. We have a service berry in here. And this water will fill up this basin, and then it has to move and transfer over to the next basin. So we're increasing the retention time for this water to move through the ecosystem. We don't want water to just shoot through something and not be able to provide a resource for the roots. And one thing that's really cool is if you guys see these grasses here, these are native grasses. These are big blue stem and little blue stem. These grasses will grow about this tall, but their root system is 9 feet deep. It is a fibrous root system, and so there's hundreds and hundreds of thousands of roots moving down through the soil and helping this water to infiltrate. And not to mention the microbial processes that are happening in there is helping to purify the water. There is a concept you guys probably know about, phytoremediation. Plants can help remove toxins. So as we move through this system, what does my little eye spy underneath the grasses here? This is pretty cool, you guys. This is an oyster mushroom. These mushrooms are what we call the saprophytic fungi. They decompose things. Fungi are actually the only organism on the planet that can actually decompose dead wood. And we often refer to them as the grand molecular disassemblers of nature. I'm gonna have a test later. And then you guys might also be curious, this log is actually Siberian elm. And so one of the concepts of permaculture that I really love is that the problem is the solution. We have this invasive, non-native tree growing all over the place in Santa Fe. Why don't we utilize it as a resource to foster the fungi that can use their specialized enzymes to help clean the stormwater? So what we're trying to do here is plan something that is regenerative. Let's stack functions on top of themselves so that when we implement something into our society and into our civilization, into our infrastructure, that actually does 1 or 2 or 3 things to further the health of the environment. So I will let you guys know here, these guys, the reason that they can break down wood is made out of lignin and cellulose. It is completely indigestible by everything. If a termite has the mouth parts to chew the wood into small pieces, the only way they're going to digest that carbon and make it an energy source is by the fungi that live in their gut. And so fungi in the scientific literature now, they're first of all, these are growing all over Santa Fe, you guys. We've got them in Santa Fe public schools, all over for the county, all over for the city. I've got them growing outside my house. They're very easy to grow, and they're very much enjoying this Siberian elm substrate. And check it out. They can break down all of the E. coli, all the microplastics, the aromatic hydrocarbons, the phthalates, and then the organophosphates, things like glyphosate, the pesticides that are in our stormwater. So why not move our stormwater through biology and through fungal mycelium in order to help us clean the water? The coolest thing, this is courtesy of the UNM biology department, electron microscopy. This is fungal roots, the mycelium of the fungi. And these guys grow through the soil, but as a plant root will always get bigger and bigger and bigger in diameter as it grows through the soil, fungi never do that. They always stay 1 cell wall thick, which means that these guys have the ability to explore the soil with the highest surface area to volume ratio of any organism on Earth. And as they're growing through the soil, these saprophytic fungi are excreting enzymes that are binding free oxygen radicals. And this is crazy because that oxygen radical will get in there and rip apart that complex carbon matrix, allowing it for it to grow in further, allowing it to open up spaces into the wood so that all the different little microbes can get in there and start utilizing it. And then what happens if that radical ends up on 2 hydrogens? We've just created water out of something that does not have water in it. And so while these guys are growing, they're moving through the soil and they're branching and they're splitting and they're actually, in some cases, fusing together here. And they create this incredible matrix. And every time that these guys grow forward into the soil, they have to secrete enzymes where they're going to be growing to. They have to hydrate that part of the environment, and then they can grow and absorb all the nutrients. So they're using all of our anthropogenic toxins as an energy source. And just so you guys know and kind of think about this, lignin, that's what wood is made out of. It's what we have based all of our stuff in civilization that can't be broken down. So fungi don't care if it's a McDonald's wrapper. They don't care if it's a microplastic coming off of a car tire. They have the capabilities to break those molecules apart and turn them into an energy source for further growth. And I will end it at that, you guys. This is right outside my house. These are dead elm trees that have been inoculated with oyster mushrooms. This is the nice dirty water that's sitting there. This is the sign on my fence that says flows to the Rio Grande. This is what I'm talking about. I think it would be so neat if we could stay positive. Everything that we've talked about tonight, we have options, and I think that we can come together and we can literally have a fantastic future and have lots of water with it. So I appreciate you guys, and it's an honor to be here.
Thank you, gentlemen. Quite entertaining, enlightening. We're going to try to move through this fairly quickly. So I thought that I would not start with a softball question. I'd go straight to a couple of hardballs. One thing that I'm intensely curious about is, and I'm going to point to John D'Antonio for this question. Why do we have a hard time getting comfortable with produced water as a potential ag or industrial use case?
It is working. Great question. The biggest concern is safety. And so one of the things that New Mexico really needs to look at, and the technology is there to clean it up. There's treatment trains that are being looked at. There's a New Mexico Produced Water Resource Consortium, which is looking at treatment technology. So pre-treatment, typically a distillation process. There's a reverse osmosis process, which we use in desal, and then there's a water polishing or some other methodology that's used to clean the water. The biggest thing is there's concerns from the oil and gas methodology used on fracking and what the fracking chemicals are. So unless you can define what those chemicals are, and they're kind of proprietary in some cases, so they're not readily dissolved to others. One of the nice things is if you know what's in there, you can prescribe a treatment technology to clean it up, but you can't do it if you don't know exactly what's there. And so one of the things that there needs to be some disclosure from the oil and gas companies is what those materials are. And the biggest problem right now is, are we going to put that water, that produced water is a byproduct of oil and gas. It's not really water, it's a waste stream. So when you treat it, and there's technology to treat it, what's the fit for purpose use? And it doesn't necessarily mean it's got to go to an agricultural use or a drinking water use. It can go to cooling purposes. It can go to cleaning up data centers, closed loop systems. There's opportunities for it, but there's a lot of opposition, and I think there's a lot of misinformation on where and how that water is going to be used. Bottom line is it's readily available. We're using it. We're taking that water and re-injecting it in the oil fields, but we're also not using it outside the oil and gas. You need a discharge permit from the Mexico Environment Department. But the technologies are there to clean it up. We got to figure out what's the fit for purpose use, what the water quality standards are, and define those standards so that people are comfortable. But we need to start with pilot projects so that we can get out and start saying, hey, this is something we can start looking at.
And that $40 million in the most recent budget was really geared towards seeding some of these pilot projects, essentially, right?
Well, not for produced water.
Not for produced water,
Yeah, not
but
for just for brackish water, just brackish water use, yeah.
Okay. Keith, let's establish a baseline. If you look around other states in the Southwest, Arizona, Texas, Colorado, Utah, how are we doing relative to those states? And are we sort of less progressive, more progressive? Give me a sense of sort of what the baseline is relative to the Southwest.
Well, New Mexico seems to have a habit of loving to be number 50. And the answer to your question is, all of those states are using produced water, they're using brackish groundwater, they're using recycled water at a much, much higher rate than we are. We're so far behind all these others. And that's the downside. The upside is this provides a tremendous opportunity for, again, investors and people who want to get involved with public-private partnerships to as John said, establish these pilot programs to see how well it works, and then to go full scale and reap the benefits of this.
And Reese, are you one of these entrepreneurs who are reaping the benefits of pilots? And do you get assistance from the state? Or what does that look like from an entrepreneur's perspective?
Well, I definitely believe in pilot projects. I think they're, how are we supposed to provide a proof of concept unless it's been put in play somewhere? And so, we've done some pretty cool projects around Santa Fe that have been funded. We've done some with the New Mexico Environment Department. We've done quite a few with the county, and we've done quite a few with the city. We've also done some private projects, on commercial projects and even residential areas. But when I first got started on this, in order to do the pilot projects, I have been funding them so that we have something that we can look at that, and I didn't even know if they would work or if we could do any of the stuff that we've done. And so I think it would be really cool to do a larger scale pilot project and do something like find one larger watershed of one of the contributing arroyos to the Santa Fe River, for example, and do enough rain gardens to where we are infiltrating the amount of water that lands on that watershed, and then do some groundwater monitoring and really figure out, is this helping at all with our groundwater recharge, or is it just sort of, will it take 700,000 years? He was just talking about those deep brackish reserves are 80 million years old. The Ogallala Aquifer took hundreds of millions of years to produce. So, I do think that we could create much more resilient, regenerative ecosystems by taking stormwater and growing ecosystem, growing trees, creating shade. And by doing that, we are already eliminating our need for potable water sources for irrigation. And then we are, creating this capability of the tree does a lot more, you guys, than just grow a tree. It's a habitat for a bird. It is probably a pollinator habitat. It is moving its roots underground and pulling water up so that other organisms have access to it. It's creating shade. It is sucking in carbon dioxide. So I think that was a long-winded answer to your question. But yes.
How's that? Okay. In doing a little research on oh my gosh, other metropolitan areas and cities under extreme drought conditions, Mexico City popped up. And Mexico City's in a world of hurt when it comes to water. And one of the things they found was in trying to get at different or deeper pools of irrigation water, there was this subsidence effect, which is a new word for me. Keith, you're nodding your head. Can you describe what subsidence is, and is it a problem if we are able to get to a lot of this sort of non-conventional water sources in New Mexico?
So subterranean ground formations are made up of ground materials, tiny pieces of particles of sand, silt, clay, rock, and so forth. But between them, there are these interstitial spaces, pore spaces, that it can be filled. When you extract water from the shallow areas, you're pulling that water out of those shallow pore spaces, which allows then the material to compact and fall down. So subsidence is just the collapse or the sinking of the surface. That is a problem where you have shallow groundwater that you're using. The deep kind of groundwater we're talking about that John mentioned, that his legislation allows us to withdraw from greater than 2,500 feet. It's so deep that it has no effect at all.
I add to that, what we've seen is if a water level drops, the groundwater surface level drops 100 to 150 feet based on groundwater pumping, that usually generates the subsidence problem. And so you got to monitor the groundwater and make sure you're not over pumping.
Well, related to that, who owns this water? Who owns the brackish water? Is it a whole game of property rights like oil and gas is? Sounds like John might have an answer here.
Yeah, so nobody, I mean, the state of New Mexico essentially owns the water, and based on the notice of intent process, if you go down and a couple of things, the state engineer could declare these deep water basins as declared basins, meaning you have to go and get a permit. Right now, the way the law is written is you can go in, and as long as it's below 2,500 feet and greater than 1,000 parts per million, you can file a notice of intent process. And the water that you pull up is essentially yours to use. When you put it to beneficial use, you can create a water right from that process. So it's kind of the same concept. If it's an undeclared basin and they're all undeclared now, that's the process to use it. If the state engineer were to declare it, again, it becomes state right, but the state owns it, but subject to appropriation via permit from the state engineer's office.
Was this in any way part of the governor's strategic water supply attempts in the past to create a fund to potentially buy this water from private wildcatters of water? Well, talk a bit about that $500 million attempt at forming a strategic water supply.
Well, the original concept was providing that $500 million, and it was 2 years of $250 million each using severance tax money. And the idea was that the state would become a buyer of that water right. And the problem with New Mexico and other areas is when you go in and the real negative concept right away is going, what's the state doing helping the oil and gas industry? Well, the oil and gas industry is paying those severance taxes based on the oil production. So that's a really important concept right there. But the issue with speculative use of water, a company's not going to come in and spend millions and millions of dollars on infrastructure if they don't have some assurances that there's an end user for that supply, right? And so they base their economic model on saying, okay, we're going to spend X amount of money, but we've got to have a customer that's going to use this. And what I kind of look at this, and there's been a lot of speculative water rights applications in the state of New Mexico on somebody going in and claiming all the water rights in a certain area. What San Augustine Plains comes to mind, where they're going to put in and take out 54,000 acre feet of water and move it to the city of Albuquerque or somewhere else, but they list every purpose and place of use. It's a real speculative, and the state engineer does not allow for those speculative deals to happen. But the point being here is what you do by providing an end user for the customer. Those speculative water pipes, they didn't have a contract for an end user. They didn't have an outtake agreement. They didn't have anybody that was on the back end of it. So you couldn't really say, here's somebody that's going to divert it, and here's a place and a purpose of use, and we're going to go there. That was all sort of, we're going to name every county, we're going to name every city, we're going to name every place and purpose of use. It's all speculative. So I think what the governor was trying to do was, hey, if we can make an end user at a certain price, we can buy that water. So you're subsidizing the cost of that water essentially, but what you're doing is jumpstarting the private sector to come in and invest money so that you have a mechanism to be able to do it. And then at some point, the marketplace would normalize the value of that dollar, and the government could kind of step out and say, okay, now let's let the marketplace work. That was the concept.
We call that a demand signal.
Yes.
Or offtake agreements in my world, which are critical to funding higher risk projects. Keith, when you think about the sequence of things that need to happen to get at these unconventional water resources, where do we start? Is it we've got to get the right laws on the books, crowd in private capital? Give me a sense of what the sequence is in your mind.
Well, up until this latest legislative session, it was really up to academic organizations or someone who just had a real curiosity about the amount of water and the quality of that water and the sustainability of that water to go out and do investigations on their own. But now, as John said, there is some seed money out there so that the New Mexico Bureau of Geology, Office of State Engineer, New Mexico Environmental Department are trying through these grants and through these contracts to stimulate pilot projects, investigations. You have to first go out and drill the wells. Then you have to make sure that the well water quality is such that it can be treated. And you have to identify the treatment train that you want to use. And then the ability to recharge and not affect other surrounding basins or other aquifers. So all of those kinds of investigations have to be done first. Once that's done and you've established that, then you've got to find an end user who's willing to buy this water that's coming out of the desalination or other treatment plants and so forth.
Reese, magic wand question. If you could wave your magic wand to either make your life easier or Santa Fe a more water-friendly place for the stuff you do, what would you have done with that magic wand?
Gosh. You know, I would just say one of the things that I think would be really interesting is to start education on these kind of concepts at a much earlier age. I almost feel like you shouldn't be able to get a high school or a college degree unless you understand all these upcoming things that we've put into our infrastructure for civilization. And I mean, it's so complicated. I mean, John's talking about these compacts that are they're 120 some odd years old. Our world is so different now, and we're expanding so fast, and there's such a more of a demand for water and the next development and the next development. It's like that's what I think would be cool is, I've rain catcher, if I could clone myself a million times, we could barely even do anything like this all over the United States, but the youth can do it. And we're working, we've got some very motivated kids, at Acequia Madre that are in 6th grade and are so excited about mycology, and they want to take this rainwater catchment system that they put in years ago that's defunct and get it to work again. And the youth are realizing they've come into this world, and I think some of them are feeling helpless. We have a 26-year-old in our office, and she's just like, well, I don't think I want to have kids because I don't want to bring kids into this type of situation we're in. And so that's what I think it would be really cool. If I could have a magic wand, we just get everybody educated and think of water as the most mysterious and amazing bringer of life to the planet. And they could be little stewards of the earth.
Beautiful.